Hello there. Welcome back. It's been a week. It's felt like 2 weeks because, as you can tell from the new setup, I officially moved. I'm out of Florida. I'm in Chicago. I actually got to watch the Bears game Monday night, and it started fun, and then it got depressing afterwards, especially in the fourth quarter. But we'll get into that in just a second. Welcome to OC and TJ, aka the Collin O'Callahan Show, aka the guy that wants to convince you that his haircut is great, but it's just still messy and out of order. But I digress. Let's jump right into this episode. We are previewing week 2. It's already moving by fast. I hate it, but I can't resist football. There's no question about that. Let me share the screen right here. Let's pull up the schedule. Let me click that. Boom. All right, so starting off with our Thursday night spectacle in just about a couple hours or so, we've got the Green Bay Packers versus the Washington Commanders. Both teams coming off impressive victories. Well, Washington not so much because they beat the Giants, but Green Bay, on the other hand, absolutely dismantled the Detroit Lions 27-13. Defense played outstanding, had 4 sacks, all of them in the second half. One of them by Micah Parsons, the newest Green Bay Packer. 1.5 from Rashawn Gary, and they didn't even let up a touchdown until the final drive, which was pretty much a garbage time. Jordan Love had an outstanding first half with a couple touchdown passes. Then they decided at halftime, to just have a heavy run approach. So that's why Josh Jacobs was able to run for 66 yards on 18 to 19 touches. The Commanders, on the other hand, beat the Giants 21-6. Defense didn't let up a touchdown themselves. They set the tone from start to finish. And even with the sloppy day from the Commanders offense, depending on how you look at it, they still ran for 200 yards. Jaden Daniels was efficient, even with a few sacks taken. They didn't turn the ball over. And Deebo Samuel scored his first touchdown as a Washington Commander. You saw a lot of Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt and Austin Eckler being able to, shine as a running back tandem. So there's a lot to expect with this Thursday night game. Both defenses are going to be put to the test since you've got two of the best quarterbacks in football right now. Jordan Love is obviously, staying put in Lambeau Field after a bit of a 4 days rest, while the Commanders pretty much had to travel all the way to the Midwest. So they're definitely feeling a little bit of the football effects already. I'm just going to make a long story short. I'm going to go with the Packers here because, number one, they're at home. Number two, because I think that after what we saw from the Commanders' offense against the Giants, that they're really going to be put to the test against a legitimate Packers defense. And if they stall out too long, then it's only going to be a matter of time before Jordan Love and Josh Jacobs wear that defense out down the stretch. And more importantly, in my opinion, I think it just comes down to Jaden Daniels. And it's not so much what he can do athletically, because we know that kid is a stud, and that kid is going to play his absolute tail off. But a couple of days ago, they put him on the injury report because of a wrist issue. But if Dan Quinn said that there should be no concern whatsoever, then why put him on that list in the first place? Maybe just to comply with NFL protocols. I get it, but it doesn't look like there's going to be too much of a factor. But if he plays poorly, people are going to be like, well, why the hell did you try to hide his wrist injury or whatever issue it was? I don't know. It's not going to be fair, but social media and a few members of the national media these days, they'll go to any length. So I'm going to go with the Packers in a very close finish here. I don't think it's going to be too high scoring, but I think the Packers got this one on the back. I'll say they get it 27-24. Let me put it right here. Just writing it down on my notebook. All right, moving on. We've got the Buffalo Bills versus the New York Jets. I'm going to shuffle the order a little bit. I'm not going to completely go down the list here, but I'll try. I'm going to get to all of them. Don't worry. But the Bills and the Jets, who would have thought that those two teams would be a part of some of the highest scoring games in the NFL this season? I mean, so far. I mean, out of week 1. I mean, let's start with the New York Jets. I mean, they lost, obviously. They got outplayed by Aaron Rodgers. He had his revenge game. Threw 4 touchdown passes, even with 4 sacks taken. I mean, the Jets were actually in control from start to finish. They led by 9 early in the fourth quarter. I mean, at the start of the fourth quarter. But not only did Aaron Rodgers throw his 3rd touchdown pass of the day to cut the deficit to 2, but Xavier Gibson swung the entire momentum of the game with a fumble recovery, with a lost fumble on a kickoff, and 2 plays later, Pittsburgh took the lead. Justin Fields goes down the field, walks in on a 4th and goal zone read to go up by 1. They They don't get the 2-point conversion, but they're still up ahead by 1 point. Then all of a sudden, the offense begins to shut down and sputter a little bit. They go 3-and-out on their next possession after the defense forced a critical stop. And then, Aaron Rodgers, he gets the Jets in a field goal range, barely in field goal range, because DK Metcalf had one of the wildest plays, or one of the wildest catches you could ever ask for, where he's bobbling the ball in a slant pass as it's getting broken up by Sauce Gardner. Jonnu Smith can't hang on to the football as it's bouncing up in the air. Somehow, some way, it bats down right back to Metcalf, and they pick up the first down and they get in Jets territory. But they stall out for a 60-yard field goal for Chris Boswell, and he made it look easy right down the middle. Jets have one more chance to take the lead, but they only pick up 7 yards before facing 4th and 3, in which Justin Fields found Garrett Wilson open on the left side of the play. I should point right here. And Jalen Ramsey, at the last second, knocks the ball out, and Pittsburgh win by 2. And listen, I'm not going to blame the offense too much because Justin Fields was absolutely impressive. I mean, the running game really took over, but at the same time, the only source of a passing game was Garrett Wilson. And more importantly, you know what I really think could have prevented all of this from happening? Is if the Jets decided not to go for 2 on their first touchdown. I mean, if you kick the extra point, think about it. If you kick the extra point there and it goes through, then you don't have to worry about going for 2 on this play. Worst case scenario, you're going to overtime, or better chance, you kick a field goal, take the lead, you possibly win the game. So fourth quarter was definitely the biggest deciding factor here, 17-6. But let's move on to the Buffalo Bills, as they had the absolute game of the week, possibly the game of the year, and we're already in week 1, which is just flat out absurd. 41-40 victory over the Baltimore Ravens. They were down 40-25 in the fourth quarter with 4 minutes left, and they pull off one of the most improbable comebacks. They score a touchdown in just over a few minutes, and then Derrick Henry, of all players, coughs up the ball on a huge tackle for a loss, and that completely opened the doors for the Bills. And the minute that fumble happened, it was pretty much over, because Bills scored a touchdown to cut their deficit to 2. They don't tie the game as they fail in the 2-point conversion, and then the worst thing that you could do if you're the Baltimore Ravens is go 3-and-out. And once Josh Allen got the ball back, we all knew that he was going to do everything he took to win. Without Josh Allen, there's no way in hell that Buffalo wins that game. I mean, 394 yards, 2 total touchdowns. They didn't have like the worst performance leading up to that comeback. I mean, they, were playing keep up most of the way. They stalled out for 2 field goals after going right down the field on their opening drive. So there was definitely a little bit of, momentum that they were giving the Baltimore Ravens. But, I mean, a 50-point lead with 4 minutes left in the fourth quarter should have been game over, because the Ravens were just flat out unstoppable. I mean, Lamar Jackson was incredible, not just with his arm, but with his legs. Derrick Henry was gashing them on several big plays. That's why they were able to run for close to 240 yards. So, I mean, you can't let a guy like Josh Allen hang around for too long. And the minute that you mess up, you're pretty much just giving him the ball game. So now that I really think about this could quite possibly be one of the highest scoring games, or a higher scoring game than, we could have anticipated here. I doubt that's going to be the case this time, because, both defenses, were extremely vulnerable. Don't get me wrong. But that Sean McDermott and Aaron Glenn are going to push these guys to have, a bounce back performance. I mean, the Ravens scored 40 points while the Steelers scored 34, and both head coaches know that's unacceptable on their ends, because that's why they were hired to be head coaches. So, in my opinion, it really just comes down to which quarterback is going to persevere under the most pressure, and I think that's going to be Buffalo here. I don't think it's going to be a blowout or a cakewalk, but I feel like it's just going to be one of those games where it'll be scrappy early on, but then Buffalo will, clean things up. They'll force a huge stop, or they'll force a turnover that could swing things around, and then Josh Allen just takes the game over from there. So that being said, I'm going with the Bills here, 27-13. It'll probably be like 13-10 Jets at halftime, and people will be thinking, holy crap, the Jets might actually be back, and then the Josh Allen magic will happen. So there you go. That's my take on that. Let's transition over to the Jacksonville Jaguars versus the Cincinnati Bengals. That's going to be a pretty interesting game, because I don't know if a lot of people remember this, but 2 years ago, Jake Browning on Monday Night Football had one of the best games of his career by putting the Cincinnati Bengals on their back at a 34-31 overtime finish. I think it was an overtime win. Yeah, it was. Trevor Lawrence obviously sprained his ankle in the fourth quarter, so CJ Beathard took over down the stretch and didn't do too terribly, but just didn't make enough plays to win the game. It was also the same time that, Christian Kirk unfortunately got hurt on the opening drive and was ruled out for the rest of the game. But that's just me being a football junkie. This is going to be the third meeting between these two quarterbacks if you date back to the 2019 National Championship between LSU and Clemson. So obviously these matchups are going to be, very intriguing to watch. Jaguars are coming off a blowout victory against the Carolina Panthers 26-10. And just a day later, they traded away Tank Bigsby to the Philadelphia Eagles for 5th and 6th round picks. So that's just letting you know that Travis Etienne and LaQuinn Allen are going to be a running back combo. And they didn't do too badly. I mean, Etienne had a huge 71-yard run that pretty much opened the floodgates for the Jaguars. I think they ran for close to 200, if I'm not mistaken. They did sputter out in the second half, but at the same time, their defense played absolutely outstanding. They forced 3 turnovers for Bryce Young. They didn't give up a touchdown until garbage time. And I wish I could say the same thing for the Cincinnati Bengals, because even though they finally won a game in week 1, they were doing everything in their power to lose that game. I mean, think about it for a second. Your offense only scores 3 points in the second half, and it was because of an interception by Joe Flacco. Cleveland out-doubled the yardage. They won the time of possession. They only let up 7 total yards of offense in that span alone. Joe Burrow gets sacked 3 times, all on the same drive on 3 consecutive plays. Yet the Browns lose because of 2 interceptions that were caused by 2 drops. And the first-year kicker, Andre Schmidt, I think that's his name, misses 2 of the easiest kicks you could ever ask for. A chip shot field goal near the end of the game that would have put them up 19-17. But before that, on the opening drive of the third quarter, the Browns, they waltz right down the field. They take as much time off the clock as possible. They go up 16-14, and he whips on the extra point. They're giving him another chance. We'll get to that game in just a second. But Cincinnati definitely should have lost that game, but it's the Browns. So, you know what? They actually had a better chance than, a lot of people were giving them hope for. Or giving them credit for, I should say. So, entering this game, the Bengals should win because both offenses are going to be electric. It says a lot when their defense was the biggest reason why they won last week, but I think that this is the week where, their offense, bounces back. They get on track, with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. Chase Brown didn't do so bad as well last week on Sunday. But listen, if the defense picks up where they left off, then there's no doubt that they're going to win this game by double digits. But I'm going to see, a larger sample size here. Just because you play outstanding one week doesn't mean you're going to be great the next. The same goes for the Jacksonville Jaguars because Joe Burrow is not exactly Bryce Young or vice versa, depending on how you look at it. So I think it'll be really close. I think both offenses can put up a ton of points. But I think when the money's on the line, I just trust Joe Burrow more than I do Trevor Lawrence. So give me the Bengals here. I'll say they win this one 30-27. 30-27. Both defenses will, force a couple of opportunistic plays, but that's probably the best they're going to get. But then again, I thought the Steelers-Jets game was going to be one of the lowest scoring of the week, so could be wrong there. Now we got the Dallas Cowboys versus the New York Giants. So I already pretty much talked about the Giants. Russell Wilson looked absolutely washed up. The offense was absolutely archaic. I mean, you've got Malik Nabers and Brian Dable getting into it on the sidelines, and then in the huddle or in the sideline huddle, Brian Dable's trying to go for a high five, and Nabers completely ghosts him. I mean, the wheels are already falling off, and we're not even in week 2 yet. That's how bad it is. A lot of media pundits and a lot of fans are clamoring for Brian Dable to start Jackson Dart, but I think they're making the right decision by sticking with Wilson because you don't want to throw Dart right into the fire, especially against a Cowboys team that has kicked New York Butt's ass since 2017 when Dak Prescott was in his second year. Dak Prescott, by the way, he's 15-2 against the Giants, and he hasn't lost to them since his rookie year. So this is probably one of the most lopsided or one-sided rivalries that you could ask for in football right now. I mean, the Cowboys are coming off a heartbreaking and gut-wrenching loss to the Philadelphia Eagles. Their offense was absolutely electric in the first half. I mean, Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb are on a whole nother level. They took advantage of a lot of dead ball personal fouls that the Eagles defense was committing. There were only two problems, though. Number one was that their defense had no answers for the Eagles offense, particularly in the running game. When it came to the passing attack, they were playing absolutely outstanding. I mean, A.J. Brown only got one target. Devontae Smith only had 3 catches. Yet they couldn't stop Jalen Hurts' legs. They didn't even try to put a spy on him. They just pretty much said, okay, we're going to try to squeeze the field. We're going to dare you to throw the football, yet we're just not going to have any linebacker in the middle of the field. So you can take off for as many yards as possible, or you can just hand the ball to Saquon. Our inferior defensive line is just not going to really do much on that front. Heck, even Will Shipley was putting up a decent amount of yards with the touches that he got. So that happened in the first half. That's why Philadelphia led 21-20. Dallas kicked 2 field goals on their final 2 drives. And then the second half begins, and it's a completely different story. Philadelphia started by getting just in a field goal range to set up a 58-yarder for Jake Elliott, which is flat out absurd, but it went through. And on the next drive, Miles Sanders goes off to the races for a 50-yard run, sets up 1st and 10 at the 11-yard line. There's a unsportsmanlike penalty from George Pickens that pushes Dallas back, but then I think a couple plays later, Jake Ferguson tries to catch a touchdown pass in the middle of the end zone, but he gets absolutely drilled by Reed Blankenship. That draws the personal foul penalty. So the Cowboys are pretty much essentially right back where they were, right at the 11-yard line. And on the very next play, Miles Sanders fumbles the football, and Quinyon Mitchell recovers, and that was really, in hindsight, just a momentum-killing play. And, a lightning delay happens where we don't even resume action until 11:30 p.m. Eastern time, and what resulted after that was just a gutsy defensive struggle. I mean, Dallas's defense was clamping up the run game. They were still playing outstanding in their secondary coverage. They didn't allow a single point, but neither did their offense. And one big reason why was because of 4 godly and just absolutely unfortunate drops on CeeDee Lamb. 2 of them that really could have decided the game. It was on the final drive. One of them should have been picked off, but at the very least, or at the very worst, it's just, I'm still thinking back on it to this day, and if CeeDee Lamb managed to make at least one of those catches, at least the one before the 4th down play where he's just diving for the ball, if he just manages to get a few extra steps in, or manages to just, look at the ball a little bit sooner, then, it's going to be 1st and 10 at maybe the 20-yard line, and I think that Dallas has all the spark and the life in the world that they need to pull off the upset, but that didn't happen. Having said that, though, I think the Cowboys bounced back pretty huge. I mean, their defense is obviously without Micah Parsons, but it's going to be without one of their top corners, DaRon Bland. He's got a foot injury that's going to sideline him for about a few weeks. But I think when it comes to this Giants offense with Russell Wilson, then I don't think there's anything to really worry about. Andrew Thomas, he's most likely still going to be out. So that offensive line is already going to be in enough trouble as it is. So it's just, listen, unless Russell Wilson just turns back the clock and returns to, his cooking form in 2017 or 2019 or whatever year that he had, 2020, where he was just, lighting up the world and, just delivering move balls left and right and just putting on a show, then I just see the Cowboys just setting the tone from start to finish and not letting up. I think the offense gets back into its groove. I think CeeDee Lamb has one of his best performances of, the entire season. And with that, I think the Dallas Cowboys win, let's say, 31-13. All right, next we have probably one of the most overrated AFC East rivalries, in my opinion, because we have the New England Patriots versus the Miami Dolphins in Miami, in South Beach. If you're a Patriots fan, then you know that this is going to be a long afternoon because the Dolphins always find a way to beat the Patriots in that stadium, how to slow them down, and just flat out crush them and humiliate them in any way possible. You think back to 2004 on Monday Night Football when the Dolphins were absolutely terrible. They had A.J. Feely and Jay Fiedler as their 2 quarterbacks. Yet they were still able to beat the New England Patriots 29-28 because we couldn't hold a fourth quarter lead. Then you go back to 2006 with Joey Harrington, and they shut down the Patriots 23-0 with Nick Saban on the other sideline. 2014 and 2013, Ryan Tannehill just looking like Steve Young, absolutely carving them up, and in other matches as well. You got the Miami Miracle. You got Jay Cutler going off on Monday Night Football. Hey, Tua Tagovailoa's rookie year, they eliminate the Patriots from the playoffs for the first time since 2008. Oh, keep in mind, Tua has yet to lose to the Patriots in his career. So I know that they're coming off a horrific loss to the Indianapolis Colts. Tua was absolutely horrific with 3 turnovers. The defense gave up a score on every drive, but listen, unless things seriously go wrong here, then I think the Dolphins absolutely bounce back, especially because the Patriots are coming off a pretty ugly loss to the Raiders at home. They were up 10-7 at halftime. The offense wasn't great, but, they got the points that they needed to stay ahead. Their defense, after getting gashed on the first drive, forced an interception that really allowed them to, be in good shape the rest of the first half. And both kickers missed a field goal each. So it was a pretty even fight. And then on the opening drive of the third quarter, Drake May gets hit by Max Crosby up the middle, stares down the middle of the field, and throws a horrific interception. And that just swings the entire momentum of the game around because the Raiders go boom, 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 touchdown in just 5 or 6 plays. And while the offense didn't really do much the rest of the half, they made the least amount of mistakes, while the New England Patriots just went absolutely nowhere. They only scored 3 points in the second half, and that was really just on a late desperation scoring drive just to make it a one-score game. So I'm not even focused on that part. So I think the Dolphins win by double digits, especially because Christian Gonzalez is still going to be out with a torn hamstring. You know that when they're in South Beach, they got one of the fastest offenses in the league. And while I expect a pretty decent showing by Drake May, since the Dolphins defense is just absolutely decimated, I mean, I'll believe it when I see it. That's what I think of when it comes to these matches. Oh, by the way, Matt Judon revenge game. Going up against the Patriots for the first time since being let go from them last year. But I think we'll try to hype that up more when they meet again in Foxborough. So, okie dokie. Next up, we got the Los Angeles Rams versus the Tennessee Titans. The Sean McVay versus Brian Callahan. Definitely a lopsided coaching matchup. I mean, the Titans are coming off a pretty ugly loss to the Denver Broncos, 20-12. I mean, their defense was actually doing pretty well. Yeah, they had a lot of penalties. They actually had 13 of them for 123 yards, if I'm not mistaken. I'll pull that up in just a second. But defense allowed Bo Nix to just go 25 of 40 for 170 yards, forced 3 turnovers, 176 yards, I should say. Forced them to turn the ball over 3 times. Their special teams recovered a muff punt, yet the offense only scored 12 points off of 4 field goals from Joey Sly because 43% completion rate for Cam Ward, 6 sacks taken. Obviously, it wasn't all his fault because he just has no line, and the supporting cast around him, or at least around the skill positions, is just really mediocre at best. I mean, Calvin Ridley had 2 horrible drops, and really Tony Pollard was the only consistent source of offense they got. But at the same time, a QBR of 7, it's just not good enough, and that's just putting it nicely. So obviously, this was kind of the outcome that we expected because the Broncos just have one of the best defenses in the league, and they have a way better coach. And 1 week later, they're entering the same situation against the Los Angeles Rams. They didn't play great against the Texans, only scored 14 points. They fumbled the ball deep in the red zone that gave the Texans a chance to steal this game. But like the Titans, Houston could have scored a touchdown. All 9 of their points were in the first half, and they were off of Ka'imi Fairbairn field goals. And in the second half, they just went absolutely nowhere. They turned the ball over twice. I mean, C.J. Stroud got dumped a few times. It was a really, really ugly game that just we were all so happy to have it end. Really, but at the end of the day, the Rams offense, they were a little more efficient. Matthew Stafford dealing with that back injury, only threw 8 incompletions, 245 yards. Kyren Williams had a decent day on the ground, but when you think of the passing game, there were only 2 consistent threats that they had, and it was Puka, who nearly got knocked out of the game. I thought it was a concussion, but managed to come back in. And then Devontae Adams. If I do the math here, I wasn't good at math, but 138 plus 51, it's 181 of 245 of the yards. It's like 3/4 of the amount of passing yardage that the Rams were able to have. So I think, having said all of that, I think this is going to be a more balanced game from their offense. I think that Tennessee's defense will definitely do their best to, hang in there and not let up. But just like last week, if the Titans offense can't get anything going, then it's just going to come to the point where they're eventually going to break. They're eventually going to tap out. And that's what you saw, down the stretch in the fourth quarter last week. RJ Harvey broke a huge 51-yard run. There was an unnecessary roughness penalty from Jeffrey Simmons that really just was a backbreaking penalty. And then J.K. Dobbins just goes off to the races from 19 yards to go ahead 20-12. So that's what I'm worried about here when it comes to the Titans. So I'm going to pick the Rams to win this one 27-13. I don't expect this to be a cakewalk, or I don't expect the Rams to put up too much points or too many points. But I think as long as they just, stay composed and don't get in their own way, then they'll be in pretty good shape from start to finish. So I can't say the same here for the San Francisco 49ers. And I do mean this in the nicest way possible. There is no pun intended whatsoever, but their offense is absolutely wrecked right now. George Kittle is on IR. Jawan Jennings is dealing with a shoulder injury. I mean, there was Christian McCaffrey with his calf. And then, obviously, the news came out today that Brock Purdy is going to miss 2 to 5 weeks due to turf toe. So the quarterback matchup is going to be between Spencer Rattler and Mac Jones. Oh, brother. We're in for one heck of a spectacle here. 49ers were able to win off a game-winning drive from Brock Purdy, finding Jake Tonjes in the corner of the end zone to go ahead 17-13 with close to a minute remaining, but it was outright sloppy and ugly. I mean, I feel like the 49ers were just doing everything they could to give the Seahawks a win, but their offense just could not take advantage of it. I mean, there were 2 missed field goals from Jake Moody, who ended up getting cut, by the way. Brock Purdy threw 2 picks. But at the same time, when I think about it, I'm like, how much of that had to do with the injuries? Because obviously, not only did Brock Purdy have the turf toe, but his shoulder was banged up. That, Kyle Shanahan kind of downplayed, said, yeah, no, the toe is worse than the shoulder. So he's already banged up 2 weeks into the season. But the defense really, after letting up a couple early scores in the first half, they really dominated through the final 30 minutes of play. They only let up 3 points in the second half. I mean, anytime the 49ers coughed it up, they did not let the Seahawks regain any sort of momentum whatsoever. And when it was time for Sam Darnold to win the game, Nick Bosa came through with a timely strip sack, and the 49ers won 17-13. So Sam Darnold only threw for 150 yards, and 123 of them, or 124 of them, whatever the number was, went to Jackson Smith-Njigba. So Cooper Kupp only got 2 catches. The running game went nowhere. Actually, I think they stopped running the ball for most of the second half. And it just came down to, which offense was going to show up in the clutch. And to San Francisco's credit, they did so. And the New Orleans Saints, they didn't. Because against the Arizona Cardinals, they were given multiple chances to win. I mean, the defense sacked Kyler Murray 5 times. Also, a defense that only let up 3 points after halftime. They blocked a field goal to give the offense more momentum. But after scoring a touchdown on their second drive of the game, they only scored 2 more field goals. They had 3 more red zone chances, yet they completely stalled out and couldn't get in the end zone. And on their final drive, they nearly tied the game, actually, on 3rd and 10, hitting Jawan Johnson down the seam in the end zone. But Budda Baker and Jalen Thompson at the last second ripped that ball out to force an incompletion. And then on the very next play, Spencer Rattler, he just lofted it out of bounds, and, they turned it over on down. So Kellen Moore definitely learned how hard it was to be a head coach, especially near the end of the first half, because they had all 3 of their timeouts after the 2-minute warning, yet Arizona just milked as much time at the clock as possible. They scored a touchdown with less than 30 seconds left. So you're thinking, okay, maybe the offense is, going to do what they can and, try to get a few more points on the board before the clock runs out. But instead, they just hand the ball off to Alvin Kamara, and they're like, nope, we'll just go in the locker room. We feel good with where we're at. So we're already experiencing bad clock management, horrible red zone efficiencies, and early defensive leaks in the first half. So this is exactly why I think they're going to be the worst team in the league. And against the San Francisco 49ers, I kind of expect the same outcome, but this is going to be a really, really ugly game. I was bouncing back and forth with this one because we already know what the 49ers offense can't do when they're not at full strength. It is just absolutely hard to watch. Just think back to 2018 or 2020 or just last year. It's just, it's just depressing. So I expect this to be a low-scoring game, but at the same time, I think, the 49ers defense, they'll definitely, carry this team from beginning to end. Robert Saleh is one of the best defensive minds in the game. And offensively, you still got Christian McCaffrey. When he's on the field, he's one of the top 3 running backs in the league. And while they are going up against their former assistant head coach, Brandon Staley, I think I trust Saleh to, get his guys more fired up than I do with the other guy. So I'll say the 49ers win 22-17. If they even get to 20, I will absolutely be ecstatic. But all Mac Jones has to do is just not screw up. And that'll be good enough. So there we go. Now we've got the Pittsburgh Steelers hosting the Seattle Seahawks. Already talked about Seattle. Offensively, couldn't get it done. Defense and special teams try to get as many opportunities as they could, yet it wasn't enough. Pittsburgh, on the other hand, we touched base on them lately, but a little earlier in the show. But Aaron Rodgers, absolutely incredible in his return to MetLife. Over 220 yards with 4 touchdowns. Again, the 4 sacks were definitely brutal, but he still did everything they could to win the game. They made the most out of their opportunities. They got points on the board when they needed to. And their defense, while getting gashed in the run game, forced 2 critical stops in the fourth quarter to, survive 34-32. And now they're just hoping to get back on track against the Seahawks offense led by Sam Darnold. So when I think of their matchups over the years, I know that this is going to be very close. I remember back in 2015 in Seattle when Russell Wilson threw 5 touchdown passes while Marcus Whedon, I don't think anybody remembers who he is, but he was a wide receiver, one of Ben Roethlisberger's favorite weapons. He totaled over 200 yards, yet the Seahawks won 39-30. A few years after that, or 2019, Ben Roethlisberger tears his shoulder, out for the season. Mason Rudolph comes in, looks pretty sharp in his, first NFL action, but the Seahawks win 28-26. Couple years after that, 2 years after that, Geno Smith versus Big Ben goes into overtime. TJ Watt and Chris Boswell saved the day. And the most recent matchup, when Mason Rudolph actually got Pittsburgh into the playoffs by beating Geno Smith 30-23. So these games are going to be really tight finishes, and I think we're going to see no different in this one. But the Steelers at home, both defenses are going to be great. But at the end of the day, I just trust Aaron Rodgers to, make the least amount of mistakes at his best than I do with Sam Darnold. I understand that it was the exact opposite last year when the Vikings and the Jets played in London, but now that this is in Pittsburgh, I think that when it comes to home openers, they usually do not get annihilated unless it's, a healthy 49ers team in 2023. So I digress there, but going to go with the Steelers. I'll say they win 23-20. I'm going to go with the same score as it was in 2021. So 23-20, Steelers versus Seahawks. Awesome. Now before we get to the 405 slate, I'm going to get to probably one of the more boring matchups on paper between the Baltimore Ravens and the Cleveland Browns. Oh my gosh, those two teams absolutely choked. I mean, with the Browns, I get it. Listen, they're a bad team. They don't really have a set vision. They had a first-year kicker, and, Joe Flacco's receivers couldn't catch. What the heck was the Ravens' excuse? 40-25 with 4 minutes left, and you completely choke? Have you not learned anything from last year or the year before that and you get the freaking point? This is now the 17th double-digit lead that the Baltimore Ravens have blown under Jim Harbaugh. Yet, no, they just go through the same things over and over again, expecting different results. And that's why I didn't have them winning the Super Bowl or winning the AFC. That is exactly why I didn't have them. Because anytime you think that they have a pristine opportunity of making a huge statement, whether they're at home or they're on the road, they get in their own way and they completely implode right before our very eyes. And unless Baltimore actually does something drastic about it, then all they're going to get is repeated heartbreak time and time again. I'm not saying that they should fire John Harbaugh because I'm not going to go that far. By the way, they probably wouldn't even do that because they're like the Pittsburgh Steelers. They're gonna keep him there for as long as he wants that job. But oh my gosh, all I have to say is you better not choke this one. Joe Flacco's actually making his first start in M&T Bank Stadium, I think, since he left the Baltimore Ravens. If I'm not mistaken, I think this is the first time he's actually going to be starting a game in that stadium since he left there in 2018. So, there's going to be extra motivation on his side. And if anybody watched that game, that loss was definitely not on him, in my opinion. Again, the stat sheet doesn't say otherwise. 290 yards on 31 of 45 with 2 interceptions. But both of those interceptions were because his receivers couldn't catch. And the defense did everything they could to win that game in the second half, yet the kicker couldn't even make an extra point or a 36-yard field goal. So I'm picking the Ravens for now, but I'm not feeling confident whatsoever. They better bounce back here, or else this is going to be this is going to be a long 2 weeks for this football team. It's going to be the second year in a row where they'll start 0-2. And if you thought the media was scolding them now, just wait if they lose to Cleveland because, oh boy, Chris Canty and Ryan Clark are going to go off on First Take or Get Up or whatever other show they're on. So, Baltimore, when it comes to a final score, 27-13. That better be the final score, or else they're going to have serious question marks. I mean, your defense looked like Swiss cheese. Your offense turned the ball over at the worst time, but you better not lose this one. You better not choke it away. Bottom line here. And the last game of the 1 o'clock slate, I was going to save that for last because we got Ben Johnson's revenge game against the Detroit Lions. Amon-Ra St. Brown provided a little bit of bulletin board material by saying on his podcast that, when he comes into the stadium, we are booing the bleep out of him. We don't freaking care. We are booing him, which is kind of normal because, he is the head coach of a division rival. Yet both teams are coming off pretty embarrassing defeats here. I mean, the Detroit Lions, they got absolutely ramrodded from start to finish. Their offense went nowhere. The defense, they really just had no answers for Jordan Love in the first half and Josh Jacobs in the second. Yet the Chicago Bears, they were up 17-6 at the start of the fourth quarter. Their offense had an outstanding opening drive to go ahead 7-0. The defense is making J.J. McCarthy see ghosts. They forced a pick six to start the second half. Yet it just felt like anytime the Bears offense had a chance to put that game away or go ahead by double digits or higher than 11 points, whatever it was, that they just stalled out and just, lulled out. Whether it was pre-snap penalties by the offensive line, Caleb's inaccuracy, the running game, not really getting the yards that they need. It felt like they were just doing everything they could to give Minnesota as much breathing room as possible while the defense was just saying, we're not going to let that happen. Yet at the start of the fourth quarter, Cairo Santos misses a 50-yard field goal. And all of a sudden, the Vikings are right back into the ballgame because on the very next possession, they go right down the field. They score a touchdown. They don't convert on the 2-point attempt, but they're only down by 5 points. Chicago goes 3-and-out on the next possession. Actually, I could be wrong there, but let me pull up the schedule. Let me pull up the play-by-play here just so I know that I'm not being stupid here. But yeah, touchdown in the fourth quarter. Then they go 3-and-out after 2 sacks, if I'm not mistaken. 1 sack, I'm sorry. 3-and-out happens, and then the next drive, they take the lead. First, the pass interference penalty, and then Aaron Jones gets wide open down the wheel route to go ahead 18-17. Adam Thielen, in his return to Minnesota, or in his return with the purple and white, scores on the 2-point conversion to go ahead 20-17. And then the Bears punt again, and Minnesota just doesn't take their foot off the gas. In the fourth quarter alone, J.J. McCarthy completed 6 out of 8 passes for 87 yards and led 3 straight touchdown drives, all out either with his arm or with his legs. And all of a sudden, you're up 27-17 when you were down 17-6. Then Chicago had some late desperation scoring drive that was really assisted by a few boneheaded Minnesota penalties. Yet the damage was already done. You're up by 3 points or you're down by 3 points. You still have the 2-minute warning and an extra timeout. But instead of going for an onside kick or kicking it out of bounds, they kicked it deep, which meant that Minnesota would just return it out of bounds or return it out of the end zone to force the clock to run, to get it past the 2-minute warning. And Chicago can only stop the clock once. That's coaching, Ben Johnson. That's on you. And right now, the Chicago Bears fan base, I've been hearing it for the last 2 days. It's just like, just when you think that there's finally hope, that they finally have a chance to, shut down the narratives that, they're a forgotten has-been and that they're just not a quarterback away or a head coach away from being successful. It's just a stupid curse. They just fall right back into the same traps that they've been in for years now. I mean, that crowd, I was at that game. That crowd at Soldier Field was electric. I mean, they were bustling for 3.5 quarters. I mean, the 85 team was being celebrated at halftime. You had Jim Cornelison, one of the best national anthem singers in the city. He sang the anthem. That got the crowd incredibly fired up because he's just one of the most iconic figures in the city of Chicago. Ditka cigars were rolling around like crazy. I mean, you couldn't ask for a better environment. And then in that fourth quarter, you could just hear a pin drop in that stadium. And when the game was over, the boos roared. And as we were walking out, everyone's just like, we suck again. On to 2026. Better tank for the next quarterback because Caleb Williams is officially cooked. So I kind of wasted my time on this one, but I think with the Lions and the Bears, I think the Lions bounce back here. I think it's going to be really close because Ben Johnson is going to be extremely motivated to win this one. It could honestly really go either way because the Bears defense did well for the most part. But again, just like I said with, the Bills and Jets game, I slightly trust Jared Goff to have a better showing than I do with Caleb Williams. I think their offense will bounce back on track because they're just too talented and they're too dynamic for them to experience any setbacks. But hopefully the defense gets back into shape or else, this is really going to be one of those games where it comes down to the wire. So with Detroit, I say the final score will be 27-20. 27-20. Could be a lot closer because if you remember last year on Thanksgiving, it literally came down to terrible clock management by the former head coach, Matt Eberflus. But Detroit was able to survive that one 23-20. So let's move on to the late window. We got the Broncos and the Colts. Who would have ever thought that this would actually be one of the more exciting games of the week? Before the season started, I thought it was going to be a blowout, but Denver escaped with an ugly win against Tennessee. And Indianapolis was incredible against the Dolphins. I mean, Daniel Jones was efficient. He didn't make any mistakes. He got the ball where it needed to be. It was incredibly balanced with Jonathan Taylor and Michael Pittman and Tyler Warren. And we were thinking, wow, Daniel Jones might be the next Sam Darnold and Geno Smith and revitalize his career as a starting quarterback. But that was the Dolphins defense. Let's see what he could do against this Denver front, which led the league in sacks last year and is going to be one of the best defenses in the league, in my opinion. So I think the way that the Indianapolis Colts can pull off the upset is if they can force a couple turnovers off of Bo Nix. But on the opposite end, it's kind of the same thing with the Denver Broncos. The only way that they can actually win this game is if they expose Daniel Jones and force him to revert back to what he was with the Giants. Really, long story short, both quarterbacks just cannot screw up here. They got to be the biggest reasons why they win, or else one is going to be viewed as a huge disappointment, and the other might be viewed as, in Daniel Jones' case, comeback player of the year, or in Bo Nix, potential Pro Bowl, or, if you're a deluded Broncos fan, second team All-Pro consideration. So I think the Broncos, they have a little bit of a cleaner game here. I think it'll definitely be a scrappy performance, but at the end of the day, I trust Denver's defense to, play more consistently through 60 minutes. I really don't know I really can't put too much stock into the Indianapolis Colts week one performance just because it was against Miami and their defense is decimated and, things are, starting to discombobulate on the offensive side. But Who knows? I hope I'm wrong because if the Indianapolis Colts can start the season undefeated and Daniel Jones is the biggest reason why, then it'll definitely be a feel-good story for sure. But having said that, Denver Broncos, they set the tone from start to finish. They win that game 27-13. Now we've got the Panthers versus the Cardinals, um, which is not going to be that intriguing. When you really think about the history between these two teams, it's kind of weird because Carolina has won 7 out of their last 8 matchups, dating back to the 2014 season, or really in the playoffs, when Carolina beat Ryan Lindley. I feel like it's been forever since anybody's heard that name. Won that game 27-16. Carried over into the NFC Championship where the Panthers just absolutely demolished the Cardinals to advance to their second Super Bowl in franchise history. And I think the last time they won, the Cardinals won, was in 2022 when Baker Mayfield was oddly enough the starting quarterback for that team. But Panthers were just absolutely horrible back then. I am hoping that this is kind of reminiscent to the game that it was last year, where Bryce Young outdueled Kyler Murray in a 36-30 overtime finish. Chuba Hubbard running for near 200 yards, and that eliminated Arizona from playoff contention. But after what I saw last week, I just really hope that the Panthers don't experience a setback or two, because last week they looked just as bad as they did last year when Bryce Young was horrific through the first 2 games and ended up getting benched for Andy Dalton as a result. 3 turnovers, no touchdowns until a garbage time drive. But the Cardinals are coming off a pretty ugly game themselves because they barely beat the New Orleans Saints 20-13. And like I said, 5 sacks, 3 points after halftime, and it could have gone to overtime if it wasn't for a last-minute breakup on a potential game-tying touchdown pass. But fortunately, they were able to hang on. So entering this game, I'm hoping that we get a closer game. I really hope that the Panthers offense bounces back. But at the end of the day, I think that because the Cardinals are at home, that I think their defense is going to play with a bit better sense of urgency, and that their offense will have a cleaner game against a Carolina defense that is really still going through the motions. I don't think Bryce Young is going to turn the ball over as many times as he did last week, but I just think that if it's going to be one of those defensive struggles or those defensive strongholds where neither offense can really do anything, then I just don't really know how much longer Carolina's defense can hold off Kyler Murray if Bryce Young is just going 3 and out, almost every single drive, or just settling for field goals. So I will, as for the final score, I'll say the Cardinals win 20-17. If it comes down to a walk-off field goal, so be it. But that's the first score that's popping into my head right now. Now we get to America's Game of the Week, the Super Bowl rematch between the Philadelphia Eagles and the Kansas City Chiefs. Philadelphia coming off, I wouldn't say a statement win, but coming off a Week 1 win against their arch rival Dallas Cowboys. A good way to start off the season if you're the defending Super Bowl champs. While the Kansas City Chiefs are coming off a surprising upset loss to the LA Chargers, in which Justin Herbert outplayed Patrick Mahomes from start to finish. The Chiefs didn't score a touchdown in the first half. They were down 13-6 at the break. And right on cue, Patrick Mahomes did everything he could to try to get the Chiefs back into the game. Yet, they missed the extra point on the second half drive, then failed to get the 2-point conversion. And when they try to make it a 2-point game, they, instead of getting in the end zone, they settled for 3 points. Yet in hindsight, it probably would not have mattered as much, because every time Patrick Mahomes got his team back in the game, Justin Herbert just said, nope, not this time. After going 3 and out on the opening drive of the third quarter, Justin Herbert put the team on his back and carried them to victory. Jim Harbaugh said, you know what? We're not going to run the ball 30 to 40 times a game. I trust my quarterback to will my offense to victory, to really show the world that he's not a social media quarterback, to prove guys like Emmanuel Odshow and Ryan Clark that he is that dude and that he should be one of the top 10 quarterbacks in the league, including myself, because I've had serious reservations and doubts about, his potential to be that type of dude. But he was absolutely incredible. If it wasn't for him, there's no way the Chargers would have won that game because their defense was getting sliced up and down the field throughout the final 30 minutes of play. And on 3rd and 14, the game decider, Chris Jones, a future Hall of Fame defensive tackle, fails to get contained on the outside leverage on a drop back pass. Chris Jones goes inside. Justin Herbert escapes to his right, has a wide open lane in front of him to get the first down, slides in bounds. Chiefs have no timeouts, so we automatically go to the 2-minute warning, and Los Angeles is able to kneel on the ball and run out the clock to win 27-21. The Chiefs were just absolutely undisciplined, and it looked like Patrick Mahomes was probably one of the only guys that really showed up. I mean, Jawan Taylor had 4 penalties. Travis Kelce only had 2 catches. Rashee Rice was obviously suspended, and then you had Xavier Worthy go down on the opening drive with a dislocated shoulder because he ran into Kelce on 2 crossing routes. 10 penalties for 71 yards. But the biggest disappointment was their defense because they got absolutely torched in that second half. I get it. Justin Herbert is a top 10 quarterback, and you're just hoping that this is just a week 1 lapse. We've seen this movie before. But it just gave me flashbacks to that Super Bowl when Jalen Hurts had one of the better performances of his career and won Super Bowl MVP and put the team on his back by winning 40-22 or whatever that final score was. Yeah, 40-22. I think this will definitely be a different type of game. You know, the Eagles are one of the younger defenses in the league. The pieces on that side of the ball are a lot different than the ones they have right now. And really what's holding me back from picking the Eagles is just the amount of penalties that they committed. A lot of them were just dead ball, unnecessary roughness. And if they can't keep their composure and if they can't stay disciplined against the Chiefs, then it's going to be a long, long game. I know both quarterbacks are going to share the spotlight and they're going to do what it takes to win. But I think just like the first Super Bowl rematch in 2023 on Monday Night Football, it really just comes down to which defense is going to, hold their ground in the most important moments. And I think Philadelphia did that the first time, especially in the Super Bowl. But I think in Arrowhead Stadium, I just don't see the Chiefs going 2-0. I'll be absolutely stunned if that's the case because you just think to yourself, man, you don't really see that happen a lot, especially when it comes to these all-time greats like Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, Joe Montana, whoever, Dan Marino, John Elway. You just don't expect them to start the season 2-0 or 0-2, and I doubt the same will happen for Patrick Mahomes. It'll be really close. I don't know if they'll score 30, but I expect them to handle their business and get back on track, 27-24. All right, now we're getting into the 3 primetime games, 1 Sunday night and 2 Monday night showdowns that I think are going to be really fun to watch. Let's start with the Sunday night one between the Minnesota Vikings and the Atlanta Falcons. Michael Penix versus J.J. McCarthy. One is coming off, one of the most resilient, victories of his young career so far, while the other did everything in his power to try to win for his team, but, the other guys just couldn't step up when they needed to. There were definitely some questionable plays by the Falcons offense. I mean, there was the 4th and 1 stop in the second quarter that allowed the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to take the lead before, both teams were even in the first half. But at the same time, Michael Penix scores a go-ahead touchdown with 2 minutes remaining. Tampa Bay's offense marches its way down the field. A boneheaded roughing the passer penalty sets up their go-ahead touchdown to Emeka Egbuka. Chase McLaughlin misses the extra point that gives Atlanta an extra chance to, at the very least, send it into overtime. Penix drives his team into the red zone. A timely breakup by Antoine Winfield forces a chip shot field goal, or what should be a chip shot field goal from Younghoe Koo, to send the game into overtime. But right on cue, the kick sails wide to the right, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers escape 23-20. So it's just the same song, Fort first, if you're the Atlanta Falcons. I mean, we've pretty much seen this movie time and time and time again, not just with 28-3, but just with so many past failures that it's just unbelievable. Entering this game, they're going up against a pretty aggressive Vikings defense. They did everything they could to, keep the Vikings offense in that game, despite, the settled field goals and the 3 and outs and the pick 6 to start the second half, being down 17-6 in the fourth quarter. And when the Vikings offense finally got into that groove, it was pretty much game over because, That defense was not going to let Caleb Williams back into the game. And the minute that their offense found a spark, they completely turned it on and set the tone to a whole different level. So as a result, I think the Vikings win this game. I think both quarterbacks will play well enough for both teams to win. I think this is going to be another grudge match that'll come down to the very wire, but it's just I trust Minnesota's defense to make a couple big stands, and more importantly, if JJ McCarthy has the ball last, I just don't trust the Falcons defense to get a final stop because we've seen this movie time and time again, especially against legitimate foes. And unless something changes or unless, Minnesota just gets off to the same slow start that they did last week and Michael Penix decides to have one of the best games of his career, then I don't see a comeback in sight. For Minnesota to avoid that fate, they got to get off to a fast start and they got to keep their foot on the gas or else, they're going to probably lose by 10 to 15 points. But I trust Minnesota to win this one 30 to 23. 30 to 23. All right, now we get to the two Monday night showdowns, beginning with the 7 o'clock one between the Houston Texans and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Fun fact here, Houston has actually not lost a home game to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I get that it's a small sample size, a somewhat small sample size, because the Texans have only been in existence since 2002. Yet at the same time, Baker Mayfield, since he's been in Tampa Bay, has not won a regular season primetime game, whether it's Thursday or Sunday night or Monday night. He has not done that in the regular season. I understand in the playoffs, he absolutely beat the crap out of Philadelphia in the wild card round, but that was when they were going through a collapse. I think with Houston, offensively, you didn't like what you saw from them. Only 9 points, no touchdowns, 0 points in the second half. Yet their defense is absolutely incredible. When you have Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter and Derek Stingley Jr., Jalen Preacher, you got a bunch of playmakers and you got a bunch of dogs. And they're well coached and they're not the biggest weak link. And offensively, you know that when you're going up against Todd Bowles' defense, who will pressure heavily, will blitz as many times as possible, but it's the definition of a group that's going to bend a lot and break a couple times. You just have to think that if you're CJ Stroud and Nick Haley, the new offensive coordinator, you just know that you're going to exploit at least a couple mismatches here. You got to get Nico Collins going. Only had a few catches last week. The run game really went in circles. Nick Chubb had a pretty decent game, but without Joe Mixon, it just wasn't the same. You saw a few flashes from your rookies like Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel. I mean, Dalton Schultz didn't have that bad of a game, but if Xavier Hutchinson is one of your leading receivers, then that is not a good thing. So I think it'll be a very ugly, low-scoring game. I think, the Buccaneers are going to treat this like a business trip. And you know that with how bad Houston's offense has looked over the last couple of years, that CJ Stroud is not going to have the most perfect game. But at the same time, I don't know. Something just tells me that D'Amico Ryans is going to throw in a few wrinkles that will catch Baker Mayfield off guard. And for a good reason. I mean, there's no Tristan Wirfs. Chris Godwin might not be there. And I get that Emeka Egbuka had an outstanding game, and Mike Evans, got as involved as possible. Baker Mayfield threw 3 touchdowns, but the Falcons defense is not as good as the Texans defense. And I think on this type of a stage, I think Houston can force just a few more plays that could really swing the tide of things. So that being said, I'm going with Houston 20-17. It really could go either way because Tampa definitely has the better offense, but I think that it really just comes down to defensive fortitude and strength and intensity. So, lastly, we've got the Los Angeles Chargers versus the Las Vegas Raiders. Hell yeah, baby. Jim Harbaugh versus Pete Carroll. What a rivalry we have dating back to their days in college when they were leading USC and Stanford, carried over into the NFC West when they were both, in charge with the San Francisco 49ers and the Seattle Seahawks. And now we switch conferences, and at 10 o'clock p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Central, 7 p.m. Pacific time, the rivalry is renewed for a third chapter. I've actually been jostling with this one back and forth. The Raiders are at home. Pete Carroll, when it comes to these types of head coaches, play at their very best at home. Yet the Los Angeles Chargers just put on a clinic against Patrick Mahomes. And you just know that the Raiders defense is just as vulnerable on paper as the Kansas City Chiefs, who are supposed to be one of the top 3-4 scoring defenses in the league. Obviously, Las Vegas has Max Crosby, and they had 4 sacks against Drake May. But you could argue that the New England Patriots offense is pretty subpar themselves. So I think we're going to get a very competitive grudge match here. I know that this is going to be really intense. I've been really, struggling with trying to pick a winner here. Uh, I just remember when Geno Smith in 2022 beat Justin Herbert in his house, and it wasn't even close. Obviously, there was Brandon Staley, so there is a little bit of a caveat there. But just looking at how the Chargers defense played and looking at the Raiders, I don't know. I gotta pick the Raiders here. I think it's going to be an upset, and I think the only way for the Chargers to reverse that outcome is to pick up where they left off offensively, and for their defense to, really get back on track. But I don't know. I don't really see a lot of points getting scored on either side here. And when you let a quarterback like Geno Smith hang around in the fourth quarter, he's going to make you pay. So give me the Raiders to win 24-20. Raiders. And with that, we wrap it up and end this episode here. Thank you all so much for watching. If there's anybody tuning in, make sure you like and subscribe for additional content. We'll be back next week to preview week 3. Enjoy the game tonight. Hope you have a great rest of your week, and see you next time.